Hi guys, Odyssey. We are moving on to chapter 14. Now, last time we read chapter 13 was called Odysseus is an Eagle, because Penelope had a dream about a great eagle that had come in and swooped down and killed all the geese, and then came back and said, "No worries, I am, Odysseus." And so she's like, "What does it mean?" And he said, "I think it means exactly what it is, that Odysseus will return and he will take care of those suitors, and that you are not to worry about anything." So we are moving on to chapter 14. It's called The Trial of the Axes. Penelope had given the matter much thought. As much as it pained her, she decided her husband must be dead. There was no way he was coming back. She had to move on with her life, and she had to choose one of the suitors to marry. Penelope decided she would hold a contest, a test of skill for the suitors. She took a small key out from a secret hiding place. She went into the storage room and found what she was looking for. Leaning against the wall was an old spare bow of her husband's and a bag full of arrows. Penelope walked into the courtyard where the suitors had gathered after eating. Her maids followed behind her. She reached the center of the circle of the men and cleared her throat to make an announcement. "Since it seems you will not give up," she said loudly, "I have finally. Although I will never forget my husband, I will marry one of you." The suitors cheered. Penelope raised her hand to stop them. "Not so fast," she said. "I'm not finished. I will marry the one of you who can pass the test. String this bow and send an arrow flying in a straight line. It must fly through the holes of 12 axes. I shall arrange these axes so they stand up on a straight line on the ground." The suitors were excited for the challenge. Telemachus didn't like it, but it was clear that his mother was insistent. It was also certain that his father would somehow manage to compete with the suitors. Odysseus would surely beat them all. "Come on then," Telemachus replied. "Let's get this contest started." The suitors cheered, ready to play. Penelope arranged the axes upright in a straight line on the ground. The holes of the axes were lined up perfectly. All the suitors had to do was shoot the arrow straight through the 12 holes. To Telemachus, it looked easy. He first tried to complete the task to see if it could be done, but he could barely even string the bow. One after another, the suitors took turns with the bow. Some tried warming the bow or softening it with grease to make it easier, but most of the suitors were not strong enough to string the bow. This meant they could not even try to shoot the arrow through the axes. The last two suitors to try were the most outspoken and bold. These two men thought that they would have no problem competing the challenge. They each bent down to string the bow. Both of them struggled. While the group was distracted, Odysseus stepped out of the courtyard. He asked Eumaeus and another loyal farmhand, Philetius, to join him. Odysseus asked them, "If somehow Odysseus were here to come back today to challenge the suitors, would you stand behind him?" They both said yes right away. Odysseus told them who he was. "It is I," he said, "your Odysseus. I have suffered much. I have traveled for a long time. Finally, after 20 years, I am back in my own country." As proof, Odysseus showed them the scar on his leg. Even though he was still disguised as the beggar, the two men recognized the scar. Just like the old nurse had, the men threw their arms around Odysseus. They cried with joy and relief at his return. "Enough," Odysseus said gently. "Let us go back now. I know the suitors will try to stop me, but I want to take my turn stringing that bow." Odysseus instructed Eumaeus to send all of the women, except Penelope, upstairs to a safe place. He explained that a battle might occur, and if so, it would be dangerous. "The women must not come back downstairs, even if they hear an uproar," he said, "and lock the doors of the courtyard. None of the suitors will be able to get out." The men went off to complete their tasks. Odysseus returned to the courtyard. Meanwhile, the suitors were still trying to string the bow. One of them was warming it by the fire. Even though he was the strongest of all the suitors, he could not string it either, and he looked very frustrated. "I don't even mind that I can't marry Penelope," he confessed. "What I mind is that Odysseus strung this bow, and we cannot." Odysseus, still disguised, had made his way back into the courtyard, he walked over to the row of axes. "Let me try my hand at this challenge," he said to the suitors. The men laughed at him, but nervously. After all, it would be humiliating if this beggar could string the bow. One of the suitors spoke. "Wretched creature," he said, "why even bother? Even if you would string it, do you really think that fair Penelope would ever choose you?" "I would not," said Penelope. "So what's the harm in letting him try? Just for fun." "But what if he succeeds?" the suitor asked. "Imagine the gossip that would spread through the town. We would be shamed." Penelope answered, "People who dishonor the home of a great king should not care about gossip or shame. Give the beggar the bow. If he can string it, I will give him clean clothes and sandals and send him on his way. If he can shoot the arrow through the axes, he will have the honor of completing the challenge." Finally, the suitors agreed. They gave Odysseus the bow. The moment it touched his hands, Odysseus handled it easily. He strung it quickly. He plucked the string to test it. It ran with a grim tone. The suitors watched, silent and pale. Odysseus took an arrow to the bow. He aimed it and took his shot. That arrow flew straight through all 12 holes in the axes. Penelope was impressed. She congratulated the stranger and ran upstairs to tell the other women. At that moment, Odysseus nodded to his son. This was the signal to begin the fight. Telemachus sprang into action immediately. He grabbed his sword and spear and leaped to his father's side. Odysseus tore off his rags. The beggar whom the suitors had abused turned into the king, Odysseus. He was as strong and swift as they had remembered him to be. The suitors watched with shock and horror. Odysseus crouched down low to quickly restring his bow. The suitors sprang up and scrambled to grab their own weapons and shields, but their armor had been removed from the courtyard. The suitors ran for the gate, but it had been locked. "Is it clear yet who I am?" Odysseus roared. "I am the one and only Odysseus. You have wasted my wealth and tried to win my wife's heart. I have come to take my revenge upon all of you." The suitors begged Odysseus for forgiveness. "If you are Odysseus," they said, "then you have the right to be angry. But we will pay you back. We will give you even more wealth than we have wasted from your home." Odysseus shook his head. "No, sirs," he said. "It is I who shall repay you with my bow and arrows." One by one, the disloyal suitors fell at the hands of Odysseus and Telemachus. Father and son fought bravely together. They had much help from Odysseus's trusted friends, Eumaeus and Philetus. Still, the suitors were many men, and Odysseus' group was only a few. But the gods were on their side, as Athena had promised. She even fought alongside them when they had trouble. After a long and grueling fight, Odysseus had taken his final revenge. All of the suitors had fallen. When the battle was over, Odysseus' home was entirely his again. His triumph felt unlike any others. Odysseus embraced his son and thanked his loyal friends for their help. And then he called his old nurse down to the courtyard. She arrived and saw the suitors laying dead on the ground. "Master, what has happened?" said the nurse. "I've gotten rid of the suitors. Go to Penelope. Tell her the truth about me," said Odysseus. It was time to win his wife back. Exciting chapter! Penelope finally just gave in and said, "Come on, I'll just marry one of you, but you have to pass this test. You have to string this bow and shoot the arrow through these holes in these axes." And Odysseus was the only one who could do it. And the suitors were like, "Well, that's not fair. You're not going to marry him." And she's like, No. But Odysseus was using this as the moment to finalize his plan with Telemachus. And at that time, they all of a sudden just took their revenge on the suitors and eventually, killed them all. Athena helped, Eumaeus helped, another friend helped, and Telemachus, and then they killed all the suitors. And at the end, he called for the old nurse to run and go get Penelope so he could finally tell Penelope the truth. And hopefully this family will be reunited and happy again. We have one more chapter to go, and we'll read it next time. All right, have a great day.